Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quint. I'm Angelica and the founder of Farm First Foundation. This is She Runs Government Dialogues. A little about us. We are a nonprofit, non-partisan organization working to amplify women's political leadership in India through capacity building and mentorship. She Runs Government Dialogues is one of the initiatives where we get political leaders from across party lines from different countries as well to discuss how to advance women's political representation. This edition of the dialogues is focused on the Women's Reservation Bill. And in the course of three webinars scheduled today and tomorrow, we are discussing different types of gender quotas. Earlier in the evening, we discussed the history of the Women's Reservation Bill in India. Now we are discussing how gender quotas function around the world. We have women politicians from 4 different countries here who will discuss the challenges that exist with after the implementation of gender quotas, or perhaps the journey towards achieving a gender quota. We have one more webinar tomorrow evening, which is scheduled at 5 o'clock. I'm really grateful to our media partner, The Quint, for enabling us. And if you're enjoying this on The Quint, then please make sure that you subscribe to The Quint's membership and enjoy the exclusive webinars offered to Quint members. You can do so on the Quint's website by clicking on the Support the Quint button. This panel is powered by Vital Voices, and the session will be moderated by Manira Alva. She is the Vice President of Political and Civic Engagement at Vital Voices in Washington, D.C. Between 2012 and 2015, she was appointed to the Government of India High-Level Committee on the Status of Women. She is an award-winning TV producer and writer and has taught in the WGS department at Rutgers University in New Jersey. Over to you, Manira.
Thank you, Angelica, for that introduction and for organizing this discussion in what is a very important moment in terms of women's political leadership. The COVID crisis has thrown up incredible examples of what women leaders in politics can do, from New Zealand all the way to our very own state in Kerala. But before I go any further, I want to acknowledge the role of Quint, who is our media partner. We understand that journalism costs money and we try to strive for excellence. So their support, which is giving us this much needed impetus to kind of discuss these issues, is really important. And it would really help if we could all boost their brand of journalism and become members of the quint.com, which has a plan for members to be able to access all of this. What Angelica really didn't mention is that Angelica and all of us on this panel are a part of the Vital Voices Engage family. Vital Voices Engage is is a one-year fellowship of global women political leaders in partnership with the Council of World Women Leaders, which is all existing and past women heads of government of state and professors at the Harvard Kennedy School to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. So we are a close-knit family. We discuss, we argue, we debate, but we are all very clear that we believe in the equity of women in national and international politics. So I'm going to introduce this panel, and I can assure you over the next 1 hour, you're going to hear very different points of view, but they come from lived experience and they come based on data and research that really fuels the work we do. So there is a country rating based on gender parity, the number of men is to women in parliaments across the world. And there is a rating of each particular country. So I'm going to start from what is the least and come to the highest. And from India, the country that is rated at a number 142, with 14% of women to men in the national parliament, is Jothimani, a first-time member elected to parliament, and is a proud product of the quota system because she has come up the ranks where India has reservations in local self-government. In third place from Romania is Oana Bizgan, which is at number 92, with 22.1% of representation in parliament. Oana is a fiery parliamentarian and has been behind 11 laws in her country to protect children, girls, and women. And this is all in her first term. At second place from New Zealand, a country that is really showing the way right now, the only COVID-free country, Rachel, is Mayor Rachel Reese from the town of Nelson. And they have 48.2% of women to men in political participation without quotas. So we're going to love to hear from her about how this journey is possible otherwise. And of course, from Mexico, number 5 in single digits with 48.2% of representation. We have Adriana Hinojosa Serpendes, who has been a former parliamentarian, a very important part of a political party, and a leading voice in the office that is tackling gender-based violence, which is on the rise in Mexico. So without further ado, a little bit about the Vital Voices Engage Fellowship and all these women coming together. Adriana, I'd like to really start with you. Number 5, a great example, having introduced quotas as well recently. What has been your experience, having been someone who has seen it through from pre-quota to post-quota to a country that is really now facing a GBV kind of epidemic as your numbers in political participation increase? Do you really believe that quotas is the only pipeline towards greater representation? And what has your experience been, and what is it that you believe makes sense for quotas or not? Over to you, Adriana.
Hello, everybody. I'm just very thrilled and happy to be with my sisters from Vital Voices. And first, I want to talk about what's going on in Mexico, because we started voting in 1953. So it's not a long time ago, if you can say, as women. And we had our first quota on 1996. And from there, it's been like slowly, but it's been a slow pace, but it has been a firm place. Now we have this 50-50 congressional law. So we women have to have a 50 quota representation in all levels of government, not only on state or national, but on Congress, Senate, and whatever. So it's been a long journey, a fast for a long journey. I should say that, because it's only been like 20 years since we started like developing this quota system. And as you said, I'm very proud of being part of it, and to have been like the first, been living in my political career, all these phases. Now what I see today is that we have a lot of more women in decision-making spaces. That's really, really good. I also seen that gender-based violence has raised, as you said it before, because no matter the law, we still face this people wanting to stop women from getting their rights represented. So it's been hard, but I do believe that quotas help, because there's a path. You have to go through that path, but you have to walk through that path. That's the thing. No matter how good the law, if we as women don't get there, and we work with it, and we help other women to get there, and we support other women to get there, quotas are just like something that could be used on a fake level, and not to really rise and make women be a part of decision-making processes in our countries.
Rachel, over to you.
Hello, Manira, and hello to my fellow participants and everyone who's tuning in for this session. I want to acknowledge the journey that occurs for women to represent their people. New Zealand's got a long history of supporting women in politics, and we were the first country in the world to afford women the right to vote in 1893, so a long time ago. But it took until 1933 for a woman to be elected to Parliament. And then it took till 1997, over 100 years later, for our first woman Prime Minister, Jenny Shipley, who is a great friend of Vital Voices, and I know she'll be very pleased that we're pursuing this issue because it is so important. So I think one of the issues for us is it's taken a long time. We have 40% of our parliament women, so it's good representation, but still, and we have a wonderful woman Prime Minister now, Jacinda Ardern, and we're very proud of her and the leadership that she's showing, not only in New Zealand, but around the world. But even in Jacinda's cabinet, 6 of 20 are women. So there's not equality in terms of representation, even in the Parliament of New Zealand, when we look at our cabinet and ministers. I think one of the things that I'm conscious of is that we don't have a quota system in New Zealand. And we've made great strides towards representation. I still see that we're sitting at ranked 20th in the world, and that's a good place to be, but I think there's room for improvement. I think one of the things that we have focused on is legislation that empowers women, and the importance in legislation of focusing on discrimination, making sure that we have pay equity, that we have education and employment opportunities for women. But it is an ongoing focus area for all of us. In my area in local government, about 30% of mayors in New Zealand are women. The last election, 25%, the previous election, 30%. So we've still got some way to go. And if I look at the female representation or women's representation in councils at local government level around New Zealand, it is still lower than 30%. So we've got some real work to do to maintain and sustain the equality. I think that this is a really interesting discussion about the women's reservation legislation. And I would just say, having had the pleasure of working with Jyoti at Vital Voices, Jyoti represents a success story. And if you can achieve more women like Jyoti representing communities through the women's reservation legislation, then that is, again, is a success story for India.
Oana, Romania has more women than men in government service. Why has that not really permeated into the political process? What do you believe are the obstacles, considering you are a complete wildcard entry? You had a great background in corporate Romania and made the shift. What can you tell us about how quotas might or might not work in Romania? Would they be an impediment for someone like you, or would they encourage someone like you to come into politics?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Manira, and hi to all my fellows from Vital Voices and to everybody that is watching us right now. I definitely believe that the quotas could be and are going to be the only way to actually get women where they belong. I'm a strong believer that nobody will actually make room at the table for us unless we make it for ourselves. Today, as you said, Manira, we have a lot of women running big companies in Romania. We have one of the highest number of women that are CEOs in companies in Europe, not only around in the countries around us. However, in politics, the highest number that we have had before this mandate was 7%. And this is also because, you know, we are a young democracy, and it's been only 30 years since we have parliament and democratic elections, but also because this was something that was, if you want, special, put aside for men. And it was known as being a very violent place, and only for the tough ones. So apparently, for a long time in Romania, we were tough enough to run big companies and, you know, manage budgets of hundreds of millions of euros, but not tough enough to do politics. Things changed a little bit in 2016 because women that were part of the biggest political party in Romania, they understood that although they represent 52% of the members of this party, political party, they were always put on the list, because we have a voting list for the parliament with lists, on the last places. So, you know, they didn't get elected. No surprise there. So what they did, they managed to make a common front, and they managed to insert into their own party rules that there will be at least 30% women on eligible places on their list. So this is how we got to the percentage that you said, a little bit over 20% for the first time in Romania. However, this is not sustainable, because if only one party is doing this, I'm not sure that, you know, you would think that other parties will follow because this one is the biggest one. Well, no, because we had our first prime minister, woman prime minister, who was appointed in a very difficult period of Romanian politics. And although she did, of course, her mistakes, who doesn't, she paid all the mistakes that men previously done. So that we are sort of trying to get out of right now, where, you know, men are very easily saying that, oh, you had your shot, you didn't do a good job, so you're not meant to do politics. Well, I don't believe that politics is something dirty or male specific. I believe that politics can be done with honesty and with passion and for the good. And if this is the case, then we definitely have to be at the table. And even though the table might be not so big right now, I think that we have to make it bigger, or to just make our place there. So I see very positive.
It's interesting, Oana, that you say that, because one of the fellows once said, when we were at the table, we were the main course at the table. We weren't, you know, around the table with voice and opinion and making decisions. So it's really interesting that you say that. And another point that research tells us is that, women are usually appointed into positions when their countries or economies or external affairs or, you know, the internal security is at risk, that very often men don't want to really be scapegoats and kind of hand over to women in those positions. That's what we've seen across the world. But coming to you, Jyothi, tell us what it is to have been able to avail of a quota system at one level, making your way to parliament. You are really at, I would say, a small percentage of women in India who kind of really do well at the local government level, but invariably that is where the glass ceiling comes and are unable to get into legislatures and the national parliament. So tell us what you feel about it.
Hello everyone, Manira, Angelica, my friends from Vital Voices, and those who tune in to listen to this great conversation. See, really impressive to hear Rachel and Adriana. They're almost close to 50%, which still we are dreaming about. See, irony is that actually India has given the first woman prime minister in 70s. She's known as the Iron Lady. So such a strong and efficient, very successful prime minister we have. But despite that, women into state assemblies and the parliament is still a dream. After Mrs. Gandhi and then Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, the ever youngest prime minister of our country, realized the importance of having women in the decision-making places and realized the importance of the decentralization of power. So he come forward with the idea of giving a women reservation in a local governance as a model, as just a try. No wonder it was within our own party and outside. It was really the idea is supposed to get good support, but this is India, so everywhere actually there is a problem. and nobody is willing to support either his decentralization idea or the women reservation bill. The beautiful speech he made in the floor of the parliament, where he describes how women are capable, powerful, custodian of the culture, and how they do control the agriculture, economy, everything. And there is no reason to believe women cannot rule this country, rule any political system. So unfortunately, when he was alive, that same night when he gave the historic speech, this bill was defeated in the upper house of the parliament. He left with tears. But after his demise, then the same Congress party government brought this women reservation bill. In 1996, the first time it was implemented in my province, Tamil Nadu. So I was like, I never understand what is politics, political party, and I do read politics in books. I, like Oana said, totally opposite to what she believes, that I was, not now, believe that politics is a dirty place. Women or nobody else should go to that place. So that's what my idea of politics is. Just I was 21, I just got out of college. I want to enjoy my life, don't want to do any serious stuff. But I read Gandhi, I wanted to do something for the society, but not through political system. I'm very much for. But the situation in my village, issues affected me, made me to believe that if I have a power, I can resolve the issue. So not a very deep understanding of politics or women participation, women empowerment, nothing at that point of time. Then first time when I said, I shared this in Vital Voices also. It's a kind of everybody felt that Kali Yuga is arrived. Kali Yuga means that is the end of the world. There is a reservation for women. Only women can fight in those seats. So definitely there is the end of the world. There is nothing can be after this. So that kind of situation when I declared my wish to fight an election, there's a lot of resistance despite we are having reservation. Then I decided to fight this out. I determined to fight the election despite the well-wishers' advice. So I fought the election. Then kind of village divided into two. There are people strongly believe that a woman cannot go to politics. It's a dirty place. They're not capable of doing things which men capable of doing. So other people also, other side of the spectrum believes it mostly consists of women. Now I can recollect. They will, why not? Always the men fighting the election. There is still our issues are remaining despite we are contesting many elections. We voted many elections. So why not a woman? So this was a situation. But when I made my decision to fight firmly, then everybody came around and supported my campaign. So that's the key, I believe. Even despite the reservation, we have a lot of stories where there is an achievement, there are sad things, there are failures through this reservation process. This reservation empowered 1 million women overnight to get into the decision-making places. It was 33% reservation. The same India, which opposed the 33% reservation, more than came forward to ensure that 50% reservation based on the work of this 33% women. So this is, when we say quota, I mean this actually, I really seriously doubt the word quota. Because we have a capability, we have a right to be in part of politics. But despite this, like, Rachel said, actually, New Zealand, the people are overwhelmingly support women to get into politics. Maybe the cultural background, maybe the awareness, maybe the people really believe in women empowerment. It's differ country to country. So I'm really happy that New Zealand bring almost 50% women without reservation. But I personally feel it's my right, every woman right to be in politics and decision making place. Just because of my right is respected, I'm discriminated, my right is ignored every time. There is a cultural situation, political situation, there's a male chauvinistic tendencies which really block my and every woman opportunity. So when this to create the level playing field, the reservation is badly needed in India. I cannot speak for the world. In India, at least, to create a level playing field. So when we come to when the local governments, I'm seriously wondering, there are 1 million women came forward and fought the elections. It meant more than 1 million women, because there might be 2 million women who have fought each other. So I really wondering, when come to state assembly elections and the parliament election, where are they? They work very hard. They put their lives into risk. They achieve many things which men couldn't do for decades. But just because they are blocked in the state assemblies, they are blocked in the parliaments, they're blocked in each and every political party. Every political party shut the door for women very clearly. So
it's interesting, Jothimani, that you talk about this, because just last week I was on a panel discussion discussing Burundi, and there they have reservations at parliaments, but they've not let it percolate down to the local levels. And in their country, they are fighting for greater reservation for women at the local level. So it's interesting to see that when countries sit down to discuss quotas, very rarely, you're not in a minority, very rarely do they just give it across the board, across everything. The judiciary, the executive, the legislature, corporate kind of, what should I say, the boards that run corporations. So it is interesting because when the idea first came up, there was the talk which came from Rosbeth Moss-Cantor about the critical mass. 30%, 30 to 40% was discussed in those days as being the critical mass of women's participation needed to ensure that change comes. Now that was like decades ago, so we are here at 2020. Do we believe that this 30 to 40% is still valid, or are we now marching towards 50-50, 50 plus? That's really the question I want to put to you all. And would love to start with Rachel, who has shown the most results without any quotas. I think she deserves the floor to start off this discussion.
Oh, Manira, this is an interesting question. I'm the first mayor of our city. It took 130 years to elect a woman mayor. And I've been working to increase women's representation in local government in our part of the country. The last election, for the first time, we had equality around the table. In fact, of the elected members, of 13, 7 are women. And I have a real belief in the importance of valuing capability in communities. And I think I look at the challenge at the moment of setting a quota at 30%. And I say, does that represent our communities? Does that represent the talent and capability? And I don't think it does. And so for me, I look for equality, and I look for equality of representation. So if our tables of decision makers look like our communities, then we better represent our communities and we serve our communities better. So I think there is an issue here in terms of perhaps setting the bar too low. I recognize the importance in different countries to get started, and so I'm always respectful of the different political systems that operate. But even when we come to the table, and Oana talked about what is the world of politics and how do we operate, and one thing that is still very prevalent is that for many of the areas where I work, and I will be one of the few women stepping forward to discuss legislation change or representing at a national level, I'll be one of the few women in the room. Sometimes I'm the only woman in the room. And one of the things that I really focus on is the dynamic of how we make decisions and the culture of decision making. And there certainly are still many, many barriers to women, a political system that actually supports a more inclusive society. And so while we can get elected into these roles, actually the most important thing is to be able to fully operate and deliver our capability within the culture and system of government. And I think in New Zealand, there are still many, many barriers to that. I think our legislation that is so clear about discrimination gives us a safety net. It gives us a platform so that if we are discriminated against, then we know in employment that we have rights to challenge that. But in a political system, politics is not a dirty game, but it is perceived as one. But it is a mischievous game often, and one where we watch women being unfairly targeted when they make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but the consequences for women in elected roles is that we become very much judged and analysed. And I just want to acknowledge Quint today as a media organisation that is making a difference to this discussion. And so I think for us to really thrive in a political world, we need a media who calls out discrimination against women. We need women to support women. We need men to support women. We need to have a system that changes the dynamic and allows women to really develop their capability and feel safe in the environment. And if I was to look around the world at the moment, I'm not sure that I see many political systems where women will feel safe and valued and empowered to fully express their capability. We're on the way, but I know in my situation, the dynamic has changed quite dramatically as now we've got equality around the table in terms of how we undertake the business of governing.
Thank you, Rachel. Enjoying this webinar on the Quint, then make sure you subscribe to the Quint's membership and enjoy the exclusive webinars offered to Quint's members. Talking about women's participation and governance, we know that greater women's participation really kind of encourages and changes the face of democracy and impacts society. What do you feel, Adriana? Because Mexico is really an interesting case. As women's participation increased, the pushback and the kind of rates of femicide really went through the roof. And that is kind of a message usually to women, which is step back, step aside. You know, it's like a warning. And we have seen so much violence. We have seen the killing of women politicians elected to office. We have seen online violence, which has taken on a completely different texture, so to say. So what is this connection and how do we combat it between women stepping up and the pushback that they face in politics? And is that why quotas are kind of not considered an option that those who hold power want to take?
While I was hearing my fellows, I was thinking that in Mexico, the discussion and the war is different. We are not now striving for more participation. We are now striving for the right to live. And that's very hard because the rates of the gender-based violence in my country has increased, as you said, a lot. I was thinking about a governess. She was the governess from Puebla, a state in my country, who was killed just after getting into office. So these things are still happening, no matter the law. So I think that quote that I heard from Alice, that women's rights are human rights, is the main discussion always. As Jothimani was saying, we have the right to be on the table. We have the right to have a voice. We have the right to change our world. We have the right to fight for women's rights. But there's still something that's holding us. So in Mexico, especially, the discussion has changed. And sometimes we feel like misrepresented because no matter how many women we have in office, things still are still happening. And if you have a male president who is not, who in the speech favors women, but with the actions don't favor women, it's like this surrealistic world we're living in. So I think there's still so much to walk through, to go through, to learn. And unfortunately or fortunately, this is something that belongs to us. And we women will have to fight for it. Nobody is gonna fight this fight for us. I'm completely sure of that. So I think that even though we are gaining participation, we now have to gain voice. And that's like the issue. No, we are now there. Now we have to make ourselves heard. And that's what I think is going to happen in Mexico.
Well, Adriana, we definitely recognize you as a vital voice, and we are so inspired when we hear your voice, and I'm sure that you will bring change. Oana, you were a first timer in parliament, but you've really found a way to work bipartisan to get what you believe is really important to pass in terms of laws and amendments. There is a thinking that I've heard very often that you don't need women to pass progressive legislation, that, so much happened before. And it's an interesting point that we hear a lot from male politicians is that we too have a conscience and we too can get this done, while completely ignoring the need for more women to be part of that process, to bring in laws that really affect them and are about them. What do you have to say about this?
I'm not going to start talking about men because I think they talk a lot about themselves. So I'm going to keep to my ladies here. I think that, I've been an independent. I'm one woman, independent. And most of my colleagues, they are part of big parties, right? So normally when you are part of a big party, you have a team behind you, you have certain prerogatives and so on. So it should be easier to pass laws, right? And when I joined the parliament and I decided to be an independent, I thought that I would do economic laws because I'm a business trained person. This is what I have been studying, what I've been working with. But then I looked around and I said, but who's taking care of, everything else? And all the political parties have their own agendas. However, I'm still like the only MP who have passed 10 laws by now and still have about 12 on the legislative process, which means that I wasn't getting bored at all. There were so many situations and so many problems that were just falling in between political parties' agendas, and I have decided it's not a good idea to work by myself because I believe that when we do things, it's not just to get results. Of course, it's to get results as well, but it's also to make a point and to mark the place where you work, right? So everybody was working on their side with their own political party. And of course, the political game, everybody is blaming everybody else and so on. But when it's coming to my laws, all my laws had transpartinical support. And all my laws passed almost with votes almost in unanimity. And believe me, there were not easy laws. I even changed the criminal law, and I made the sex offenders register in Romania, and I gave the rights to education and to health to children that don't have IDs and so on. So these were not, easy laws. There were laws that were very important, but somehow by talking to every single person and being very confident and having zero prejudice, I managed to convince my colleagues that this is something to be done. And to be honest, I'm really proud of it. And I'm really proud of my colleagues because when it's coming to this kind of subjects now, after 3.5 years of training, it's becoming a little bit of something that we do, right? And although we were not allowed to make a women's caucus that I've strived for about 2 years, we managed to find each other. I said we are 20% of women here, so okay, we might not be allowed to have a caucus, but we decided to make a WhatsApp group. So I think that the fact that we learned to work together and we trained and we were honest with each other and we supported each other, we trained on that, then every single woman went back to their party and explained and talked about these laws that we passed together. And also, none of these laws, seriously, I don't feel necessarily that they are mine, because I truly share them with my colleagues, and I truly have both women colleagues and male colleagues who fought for these laws to pass. So imagine how, you know, this would be if we would have more women to think of everything else that is falling in between agendas, because, you know, politics are about making a real change in people's lives, and who would make who better to make a real change in people's lives if not the ones that understand that, and not only the ones that are used to having that position and think, you know, see their own way.
Before we go into questions from our audience, I have a last question for you, Jothimani. There is the talk of women needing to come across party lines in a bipartisan kind of, coalition building. How easy is it with this rising level of conservative, rising level of fascism that we're seeing across the world in our politics? And it's really a little bit about ideology versus biology. You know, the whole idea that women's representation is not just about having women, but it's about having women who think of change, who think of things differently. And that's a challenge we're seeing across the world. I don't think it is relegated to any one country. Do you believe it has been easy to build bridges, you know, across very divisive groups to come together for something that's really important for the country?
Whether it is difficult or easy, it's very important to build bridge. I fully agree with Oana. There are, even now, we have a very divide politics for the last 6 years in India. Many times we don't see eye to eye. But despite that, if there are misogynist comment passed against the chair a few months ago, so we, irrespective of party, we stood together and make sure that that person has apologized to the chair. So there are issues when it comes to women rights, women empowerment, education and the environment, sexual abuse. So there are areas still actually we can work together. So even in a family, it's very difficult to bring all of them together 100%. So there is always a space, despite our political differences, despite our ideology, there are always, you and me as a human being. Your problem and my problem is the same. This world problem is our problem. We are living on this earth. In that view, still actually, I personally believe we can work together on issues. We can differ on many issues, but still, of course, we can work on many issues. We have tried this time and again, even in my state. We have, even within the alliance, we have different partners. Not necessary the alliance partners are work together every time. Not necessary we have to have a same opinion. The opinion differs always. So still, as a woman, in my province we have 3 women MPs. We try and work together and try to accommodate male colleagues also. These are important. Sometimes they tease you, sometimes they allure you, sometimes they accept your views. But still, the conversation is very important. At the end of the day, like Oana said and others says, see, when we're sitting together in the table, I first feel the conversation is very important. That might lead to the real result. It might not lead to the result, but the conversation can make a lot of difference.
It's interesting. So I'm going to start some of the questions that have popped up. There's a very important question talking about reservations and quotas and the idea that women are not a homogeneous group in any of our countries. And is there resistance, or are we open to the ideas in each of the countries that you represent to there being sub-reservations within the category for Indigenous women, for LGBTQI communities, for marginalized groups? Or do we just see it as reservation, we need women, and we're not really going to go into the various groups that make up the women's population in our countries? So Adriana and Jyothi, I think this is a question to be posed to you all first. And I think Rachel also has some inputs as far as New Zealand is concerned. So Adriana, I'd really like to start with you. How does Mexico look at it?
I think that we have to go step by step. First step, we have to make this representation of this 50% or more of the population, at least in my country. Women are the 51% of the population, and we're still seen as a minority. So we have to go that from this space. And I believe that democracy will start growing and will start developing, and it will come naturally. No? As long as we have more voices in Congress and on all levels, there will be more space for more people and for more things. So I think in the case of Mexico, that we've gone through this first part, that we have this 50-50 chance of getting there. Now we have to use this to be, like I was saying before, the voice for other groups or other sectors, so they can come increasingly participating on this. So I think democracy is always like dynamic. So we have to start somewhere. And I think the gender quotas is the first start.
And research shows us, across the world, that women are more receptive and more sensitive to those who share oppression and marginalization. And the chance of them representing these groups in a more authentic manner is higher. But having said that, there is also a very large group who believes that the moment has changed, that with Generation Z and everyone who are just so impatient with systems that they feel they have inherited, which they want no part of, really want to see substantial change. What do you say, Jyothi? Do you believe that it's important for reservations to come and then to look at sub-reservations within reservations? Or do you think clean it up, change it, get it going? This has been on for more than 2 decades. Let's come with something that can see us through for the next 30 years at least.
As I said, it might differ to country. But still, I believe Indian reservation in Panchayat Raj is actually a reservation within reservation. Among the 33% reservation, there is a reservation for Dalit and tribal women. So unless you see this, India represents probably India is the only country have a caste system, which is oppressive, which is very, very oppressive than gender. Frankly, we have to concede that. So when we come for a reservation, it cannot be a reservation of a creamy layer. It can penetrate deep into that. So that way, we have to, when we see the reservation, we would see not simply a woman. Among the women, which are all areas, which are a sector, it has to go. That is, I feel, more important. Second thing is this 50%. Actually, I personally don't convince the idea of 50% reservation, because why this 50% reservation? You and me is capable than like anyone. So because the situation is not right, because people are not willing to accept, they try to oppress, they try to discriminate, they try to block us. That's why we need a reservation. My personal feeling, instead of fighting within the parliament, I'm saying in the Indian context, when political parties get their own reservation for 33%, 50% or whatever it is, then actually this women participation might go beyond 50%. End of the day, as you said, women are more sensitive to issues than men. I'm not saying all men are bad. I'm saying because of the nature we live, what kind of drama we go through, what kind of life we live, what affects us, this actually made us completely different from a man. Men, mostly, at least I'm saying, are slightly different. So in that way, actually, India has to look for a political party reservation. So one other thing, this reservation, one issue I feel really bitter, that it makes mandatory a woman versus woman, which I hate actually. I love to fight against men. Not that men is bad, because you actually screw another woman opportunity, you actually come up. That actually highly, from the day one, I feel it's very, very uncomfortable, because now I feel very comfortable because I was fought against a man and won. So this is not, when we talk about the reservation poll, within the political party reservation, it's not necessary you have to fight not mandatory that you have to fight another woman. When some political party might feel woman in one constituency, some other political party might feel men in the same constituency. So that way, I feel that actually smart way of taking Indian reservation forward is a political party reservation, so that political parties cannot lie. In the floor of the parliament, we don't have the majority to pass the bill, so you can build the cat.
Got it. Rachel, tell us about New Zealand, where you'll have quite a substantial indigenous population, and how does it work? And
Oh, Manira, it works in a myriad of ways, and still not particularly well. So we have in New Zealand, our Maori population have seats in Parliament that are reserved for Maori, but we still see a lack of balance around decision-making tables. I think this is a really interesting question, because I've had it posed back to me after talking about Vital Voices that actually a focus on gender is too binary, and we shouldn't be doing that. And in this world in 2020, we should be thinking more holistically about representation. But I don't think women's representation is a policy of division. It's actually a policy of inclusion. And I think that's what we need to focus on, is we need to say there are many barriers to representation for Indigenous cultures, for our Pacifica community in New Zealand. We're a multicultural community, and we won't see that diversity of ethnicity around our political tables in New Zealand. We've got work to do on that. But I think the fact that we still have work to do doesn't mean that we forget about the importance of women's representation. And I think there is a challenge for us, because when I'm having these conversations, and I'm desperately not going to try not to be ageist here, but it is very easy to forget how hard we have had to work to get to the place where women are represented in politics, women are represented on board tables. It might feel as though it is something that the problem's been solved. But I know that if we don't continue to focus on this area, then actually we won't just see a slippage in women's representation, we will see a slippage in the diversity for everybody. And so I see this as a policy and a momentum that is very much around inclusion for all and a celebration of diversity. It's not a binary discussion. But I think that's one of the reasons in New Zealand where we haven't got constitutional quota systems in relation to women's representation, because that conversation itself is a complex one around who else should we be providing quotas for. And we have some, but I think there's a better conversation to be had here around inclusion, removing barriers, removing the inequality that makes it difficult for people to get represented. Money counts in politics everywhere in the world. It costs to run a political campaign, and some of those things are the barriers that stop diversity in parliaments and at council elections.
It's interesting that you say that, Rachel, because when Dame Jenny Shipley spent a week with our fellows, I believe Adriana and Angelica were part of that group, where she talked about how difficult it was for those who came before Jacinda, right? You only have the third woman leading your country. And if you were to actually collate the experiences that each of the women who went before had to go through and how much more difficult it was, it's easy to take stuff for granted, right? So one of the questions coming in is about basically this whole movement to bring more women into politics. Does it fail because women don't consider men as allies in this journey and in this process? And would it make sense to include more men in this fight for greater representation? So I'd love to open it out to whoever wants to jump in. I need a thumbs up. Okay, Jyoti, it's yours. Jyoti, over to you. I think
we always want men to be partner in all our initiative. See, you cannot, there is no point actually you keep on working with the victims. Times you need perpetrators. They might not be, all of them might not be perpetrators. So as I said, this woman reservation is an idea of a man, Rajiv Gandhi. Before that it was Hegde. then there is someone called Periyar who advocated 100 years back of women empowerment, which even now we don't think of. So there are men actually who are very progressive, who really believe in the social justice, believe in inclusion, believe in empowerment. Actually, I don't think any of us actually would like to keep men away from the process. This is like Adriana rightly said, it's not only women right, it's a human right. So everybody has to work together to bring real change.
Adriana, would more men being involved in this process reduce violence against women? That's where I'm hoping to find the connection.
I'm positive it will, because I really think that the fight for gender equality is not only for women. We have to make them part of the process. And this is like a cultural transformation, because we have to change like this chip they have, or we all have in our brain, because many women still have it, no, that we are not equal. So I think that we have to work for so many spaces and sites. It's like a very complex issue. And as Rachel says, it's 2020 and we should be focusing on other issues, but we're still here. So we have to get allies from whatever we have, our sons, our friends, our spouses, and make this a human rights issue, not a gender issue. I think that's the point.
Oana, did you have enough male allies when you decided to transition from the corporate to the political?
I did. And in fact, I mean, I think we're smart enough to understand that we need to go by there if we want to achieve what we are talking about. You know, I totally agree with Jyoti. What she said earlier was really talking to me in terms of, you know, we talk person to person. That's exactly how I brought to the table of, you know, the transpartinic laws that I have passed, both men and women, because we talk as person to person. And in fact, if you do that, I think that you can connect to a certain level. Well, people, of course, they will not give you the space from the beginning. Of course, they will not tell you what you want to hear from the beginning. And of course, they will do anything to undermine you or to discourage you or to whatever. But that's, I guess, human way. But if you keep doing it and if you strike them with authenticity, and you know, when you believe in what you do, it's all over your face, and that's a tool that not a lot of men have. I'm not gonna generalize here, but I definitely saw more passion in more women doing what they believe that is right. And then it's not always, you know, so difficult to push things forward. And that's exactly why I believe that we're smart enough, we're strong enough, and we're resilient. So yes, men at a certain point of time, either they choose or they will have to be our partners in this, because this is the right thing to do.
I'm reminded about what President Dalia Grabovskaite told the second cohort when she was with them. She said, politics, you have the choice to either be or to do. You know, that's really the choice, to do or to be. And it's really such an important question that women face when they get into politics. Very quickly, 1 minute to each of you. Do you believe in quotas or not? Do you believe it is the pipeline to see a greater number of women coming into decision-making and governance? And, or do you feel there are other ways of doing this? So Jyoti, I start with you, then to Rachel, Adriana, and Oana before we start summing up.
I strongly believe quota is the very important pipeline. There are other countries really who had a different method of doing this. So we cannot say quota is the only way. Quota is a very, very important way, especially a country like India. As if now it looks like an the only way. Maybe the time change, the mindset change, the more support coming up, then there might be better ideas. With those quotas, we can achieve this. But at this point of time, we definitely need quotas.
Rachel?
Oh, Manira, I think quotas play a role around the world to level the playing field, as Jyoti said. I think there is a range of mechanisms to achieve the outcome, and I think legislation is critically important in relation to discrimination. You know, you need the supporting mechanisms. We need a system of government that supports women when they reach parliament or they reach their elected level. We need to also empower each other, and Oana talked about the importance of being strong and smart and confident and authentic. And so one thing that I feel very passionately about is that we must be women in our roles, and we must serve our communities as women. And what I don't want to see is a system that dampens down and takes away the right of a woman to have a voice and express herself in the way that she feels is right, and to serve in the way that she feels is right. And so, while I can see the role of quotas working, they're a start, but they're certainly not the finish. And there's a lot more work for all of us to do to ensure that we are authentic, empowered leaders, because when we are, we do the best that we can for our communities.
Oana?
%. I totally believe that quotas are the first must-do step. Exactly as Rachel said, this is far from being enough or the end of the fight. But I strongly believe that once the quotas are in place and the women are there, you know, not a lot of people will make such a big fuss about it, and we can actually start doing the really important stuff for our communities. I really hope for Adriana and for our sisters in Mexico that the violence, domestic violence and violence against women will go down, because this is definitely something that needs to be fought as well. But quotas are the first must-do step, in my opinion.
Wonderful. As Rachel said, I think that's really what we hope to do through this fellowship and working with all of you, to really hear and amplify strong, smart, authentic voices who will change the texture of governance and polity in their countries. We're really, what should I say? I should be grateful to Freeport McMoran, who has really kind of given us the freedom by funding this fellowship to meet and to exchange ideas, to come up with advocacy platforms. And I also want to thank Quint for supporting this initiative and giving us this platform to discuss it. Of course, none of this would have been possible without our VV Engage fellow, Angelica, who is one powerful woman leader in the making, and has organized yet another of these webinars, which is tomorrow at 5 p.m. India time. It's a part of this dialogue series on the need to see more women politicians at the table, not as the main course. But I want to end by saying quotas, reservations, affirmative action, whatever you call it. I think what all of us really agree to is the need for greater equity for women within these systems, right? It's not just about numbers. In countries which have fewer numbers, it's about that voice, it's about that opinion, it's about being able to truly bring in and affect change, and to be paying it forward, that even if you are fewer in number, you are representing that number that is in your country. And that is really what all of us are committed to, passionate about. We know that it's a journey. We know that when non-dominant groups start to come to the center to kind of partake and share in power and the creation of their countries, there is oppression, there is pushback, there is greater violence against them. But as Rachel said, and I repeat, we are smart, strong, authentic women, and we are here to win the battle. So with that, I want to thank each and every one of you and all our viewers and all those who post questions. I hope I did justice to the questions you asked, and let's go out and pay it forward. Thank you very much.